I realized that, I lived 3 months without all my so-called important things. So like that means that they are not truly important.
My dream life right now is actually almost like a yurt or a tiny home or a small cabin that's in the woods.
You are in the middle of pandemic. You have dreams to travel, and all the borders are closing on you. You're breaking up with your partner, and then it seems like all your life is collapsing on itself. How do you keep your positive mindset and turn that around and make it into something really beautiful?
But the hard times are always going to be there. It's you are the hero of your own story, and the person you're saving is yourself. I think like the moral of the story for the people thinking about it, just try.
Let me tell you a fun fact about the podcast. We're at the beginning process and you can have a tremendous influence over our channel. By just liking and subscribing to our channel, you'll help us increase the quality of the videos that we're creating. Also, you'll stay in the loop with the new videos which are coming every week. Thank you and enjoy the episode.
Welcome everybody. This is the next episode for the Infinito Untold Stories. And I have here Steph with me, and I'm really, really excited for this conversation. Welcome, Steph.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited too, and I can't wait.
So Steph is an entrepreneur. She started her journey in 2021 when she launched her business. And what happened to her is that she broke up with her long-time partner, and then she decided to sell everything and just start this amazing journey. So let's go there for a second. You are in the middle of pandemic. You have dreams to travel, and all the borders are closing on you. You're breaking up with your partner, and then it seems like all your life is collapsing on itself. How do you keep your positive mindset and turn that around and make it into something really beautiful?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I mean, we were just talking about mindset right before we started recording, and I love this conversation because really my whole life so far has been a journey to having a positive mindset and learning how to work with it and learning how to accept kind of myself when I fall into that negative mindset. So yeah, the journey really did start, unfortunately, at the precipice of the pandemic. You said, I had gone out at 2021, but I had actually started preparing to become a digital nomad way back in 2018. When I first learned about what a digital nomad was, I decided I really wanted to do that. 2019, I made a promise to myself that I'm going to become a digital nomad 1 year from now. And I mean, if you count ahead to 1 year from 2019, January 1st, that was 2020. January 2020, we were so lucky. We didn't have the pandemic yet. I made really big moves in that 1 year. Like you said, I broke up a long-term relationship because I found myself in a position of wanting to go after this lifestyle, and my partner did not want that. So obviously we had some value differences there. I had all these things I had accumulated from years of being a young professional and kind of building a life in one place. We had an apartment together. We didn't own it, but we had a lot of stuff. I had worked really hard to pay off a car. I had worked really hard to make a name for myself in my local network and build this small business while I was working full time, which is a lot of effort. And then January 2020, my ex and I, we let go of our place. We said our goodbyes. I traveled home to do some pet sitting for my family, thinking that, maybe that's a way that I'm going to make this nomad life a little easier, being a pet sitter, because a lot of nomads talk about that. And my family ended up actually coming home from Florida early, where they had been, because there was this pandemic starting. And the first thing they kind of said to me was, hey, we know you're planning on going to Bali in a couple weeks. I don't think you can do this. It seems like this pandemic thing is going to be a thing. And I listened to them. And I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, because I had all this go, go, go. We're going to finally start this life we had worked for 3 years to make. And it just seemed like all of a sudden that was being ripped from me. So that whole period wasn't really a positive time for me. I watched borders closed. We all saw people die. We all probably know people who either passed away from COVID or have long-term effects from the pandemic in some way. And I really didn't become a positive person in that year where I waited to travel. I think I listened to a lot of the negativity that was happening in the online digital nomad space. I think I paid a little too close attention to what people were saying on Reddit, that you shouldn't be traveling right now. It's a bad time. I don't respect anyone who travels right now, blah, blah, blah. And I think I really gave my power away to a lot of things in the pandemic, and I didn't really become a positive person. It wasn't until much later where I watched my ex move on and get engaged through the pandemic right away. I watched my friend groups change. I watched a lot of people break up, lose their jobs, lose their houses in some cases in the pandemic. And I actually got to a breaking point where, I might as well go there now. I got so depressed in the pandemic that I was really in a place where I had given away my power to all these forces. I felt very negative, very sad, very helpless, that I actually felt suicidal because I stopped sleeping. I developed an eating disorder. I was doing all these things just to try to feel better, but they were making me feel much worse. And I got to the point where I couldn't sleep anymore. And my only thoughts for a while were, the world is going to end. I might as well end myself. And I actually called for help. In Canada, a lot of people were struggling at the time. We had a mental health line. And I tried to call it one night because I was thinking of ending my life. And I couldn't actually get through. I tried 3 times and the line was too busy and it kept disconnecting my call. And I kind of realized in that moment, okay, Steph, you have to take your power back. You are the only one who is going to save you. And that was my turning point for me. I stayed up all night researching where I wanted to go. And by the morning, I bought a plane ticket to Mexico. And I took my power back. And it was a journey back up to taking my power back and realizing that, hey, you have the power to be a happy or sad person. Make the choice. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way to take you through that. It wasn't really a positive mindset. I actually really had to fall back and become actually a sad, negative shell of myself in order to realize that I'm the only one who can make this life actually happen, if that really truly is my dream.
That's something truly interesting, because sometimes the worst thing that happened in our lives is a blessing in disguise. You just have to look for it the right way. And sometimes, as mentioned as well, you need to hit the bottom of the barrel. And then to be at that breaking point, you're able to make a change, because you have to realize that everything that you've done so far in your life was not enough. So you need to kind of do something else. I had a similar experience, and I also felt like really, really bad during the pandemic. But like my mindset at the time was like, well, if the world's going to end and if I'm going to die, I might as well just die fighting, right? Or doing what I love. So just go in style, right? So that's the only option that there is there to have. So that's truly interesting that, sometimes it's a necessity for bad things to happen for us to wake up and to make something truly amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, now looking back, can we even really call those things bad? Or do we just look at them as challenges or obstacles, or I guess a fork in the road where you do get to that low point and you have to make a decision. So your decision was, yeah, screw it. I'm going to fight. And that was really my decision as well. So yeah, I think we can both say we're grateful for the losses that we experienced, because they took us somewhere beautiful.
Absolutely. Tell me just a bit about, you mentioned about that you have to let go of most of your stuff, because that's something truly difficult for most people, because you accumulated everything you had to some point. So if you had to make a list, you could argument the fact that every single thing you had some use, it was useful, you want to have it, you want to throw it away. How do you make that decision and say, like, what do I throw away? What do I sell? What do I keep?
Wow. Okay. That's a great question. And you're right. That is something that I do notice a lot of people struggling with, particularly the people who have a full house and decide they want to sell it to pursue a nomadic lifestyle, which I think is really brave and awesome, by the way. But yeah, for me personally, things never really held that much value. I've always been a traveler. I've always been one of those people who believes experience over things. So even the things that I did have at the time that I loved the most, such as a car that I worked really hard to pay off right away and keep beautiful, my bicycles, I'm a hardcore cyclist. I had accumulated bikes I was proud of, and I had built them and spent a lot of money on them and maintained them lovingly. It was really hard to watch somebody come and test drive my bike that was going to take it out of my life. But there were very few things that I had that I was going to break up with, like my partner. Those things were really hard to let go of, absolutely. But once they're gone, you can't take them back. So there are really in my life very few things that I have held on to. Those are mostly clothes and paperwork that I actually need to prove I'm a human, as well as a few mementos from people that I've loved in my life that have passed away. But other than that, I actually have very few things. Right now, you can see I'm in a garage. This is my family home. I'm home visiting. I have 2 vacuum bags upstairs of clothes, a little bit of paperwork, and just the 2 backpacks that I actually travel with full time. So I do have very few things. And for me, yeah, it really has always been less is more. Become less with more is a mantra that I live by. And I just am not a person who needs things. But for somebody like some of my friends, when I think about all the stuff that they really have, if they were to take on a nomadic lifestyle, I don't see them letting go of their things. I see them investing money to save their things. Yeah, I see them paying for a storage locker or keeping their house some way with their things in it. But yeah, for me, it was really about getting rid of stuff that was really just weighing me down. I can't even remember all the junk that I got rid of. But at the time when I bought it, when I first bought it and was accumulating that stuff, it seemed so important to me in that moment.
Absolutely. That's super interesting. And also, once you start traveling without many things, you realize how little you actually need. And I had a very interesting experience when I moved to London, because the Czech language is very expensive at the time. I packed everything that was really, really important to me to have in London. And I told my parents, like, listen, right away when I arrived there, send your address, ship those to me. So what happens when I arrived in London, it took me about 3 months to find a stable place, because I was just living on friends' couches and so on and so forth. So until I got to a place where I could have them delivered, it took me a while. And then when I got them delivered, I realized that, I lived 3 months without all my so-called important things. So like that means that they are not truly important, just like stuff that I carry around with me so I can feel, secure. But at the end of the day, once you kind of learn to let go and then realize how little you actually need, then it's much easier to let go of things.
I have a question for you, actually. Is there anything that you've let go of that you miss?
That's a good question, because I was thinking about that specifically. So when I moved from London last year, I had a truly amazing 4K screen, which is really big. And I really love that one because I'm a filmmaker and I like to have like very high definition graphics and really good colors for it. So it's one of the things that couldn't make the cut, because I just wanted to have like a backpack and small luggage with me, and I had to sell it. It was kind of like, didn't have an emotional attachment to it, but like, it was really good quality. That's something that was really close to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if you had it in your life today, would your life be different? Would you be making more film?
Not necessarily. It's just like it wouldn't impact my life that big. It's just like one thing that I actually like. And then I realized that you can just go anywhere and buy something else. So yeah.
You can.
Yeah, almost everything is very interesting, because I was making a tutorial recently about how to the most important thing when you're traveling, and most people overpack when they're traveling. And then you have 4 important things that you have to have with you at all time, which is laptop, passport, you need to have phone and wallet. Everything else can be replaced. And if you go to many places in the world, most of the things that you have, it's cheaper to replace as opposed to carrying it from home, which is really interesting.
Absolutely. I think we get so attached to things, and being a woman, I know when I very first started traveling, I was a little disappointed I couldn't get the same makeup I used to have. But I think that's just an opportunity to go out and kind of re-familiarize your stuff with the thing that's in this new market that other people are using that's different from what you've used back home. Yeah, it's not the same as having big things that maybe we miss. Like, for instance, for me, I do miss having a bicycle all the time. I miss cycling. I have to rent or buy if I'm staying in a place, and then I have to sell it again if I'm leaving. And it really makes it hard for cycling. And I don't bike as much as I used to, but I had other hobbies. I brought a hula hoop with me traveling because I'm a hula hooper, but I actually don't hula hoop all the time, and there are some times that it's cumbersome that I'm traveling around with this hula hoop and thinking, well, if I really did change my life a little bit and start traveling with a bike, am I actually going to bike that much? Because my life is a little different when I'm nomading. I'm a different person now, and I think you can attest to that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the thing is like, as mentioned before, you have just a few things and you realize that's enough. It's all about the people. It's all about having the right network around you, and then everything else can be replaced very easily.
Everything.
Now, I want to get into a topic which I was really excited to be talking to you about, which is the dating life as a digital nomad and the challenging that you have so far, and how do you cope with that? And also, what advice do you have for people when they're nomadic? Because you're a solo traveler and then you have experience in this domain. So yeah, talk to me about your dating life.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think this is a really fun topic to talk about because it is one of the most challenging things for me. And I notice a lot of solo travelers have this problem too. And it is really hard, I think, to meet other nomads because you realize that there are a lot of couples traveling out there together, and it is really easy to envy them being a single solo traveler. I think a lot of us want that. That's not the case for everyone. There are certainly people who are truly happy being alone and traveling alone. But I would say that digital nomadism and being a solo traveler is not the same thing as being a solo backpacker, because this is a lifestyle. It's not just a trip. So if you are someone who values dating in your life, you probably want a partner. And that can be really challenging because I don't have a base in another country but my own, Canada. When I come visit every once or twice a year, I am afraid to date here because I'm afraid I'm going to meet someone who doesn't want to travel. It is very rare to find digital nomads in my home city. Maybe in some of the bigger Canadian cities there are some, but I actually don't live in those. When I come home, I'm visiting my family, I'm prioritizing them, so I'm not really dating, and I'm not going to these big markets just to meet a date. But it can be, it's different when you're traveling. You can go to a digital nomad hub and you can maybe meet nomads. Not always, though. There are a number of tools that have popped up in the last number of years to help people with this lifestyle travel. One of which is called Nomad Soulmates. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so it's an app, but I believe it started as a Facebook group, and it is literally like a Tinder for people who are traveling around the world. And it has a map feature where you can kind of zoom into your location and see all the little profiles that are kind of near you. So if you are in a place where there's other nomads, you can actually message them. You don't even have to match with them. And a lot of people have their Instagram or their other contact information on their profiles. It's not as strict as Tinder or Bumble, which don't allow you to do that. So I have actually met guys that way for me, which is great. But it's still a challenge because you are only in a place for such a short time. So that leaves you with a dilemma. You can either move really fast to try to meet someone and say, hey, this is my lifestyle. Do you want to start traveling together? You can kind of drag it out by saying, hey, my visa ends in this country in X amount of time. What about yours? Want to meet up in another country later? which also is challenging. Or you can have a short-term relationship, which for me is really unfulfilling. But I would say that if you really want to date, it is kind of the path of least resistance, at least I guess as a woman. You can use the good old classic Tinder or Bumble. And in some areas, I will say, people who are listening and who have used dating apps and hate them, they are better in some places than others.
Absolutely. I'm personally not a very big fan of dating apps, and one of the main reasons for them is because it doesn't make a good story. It feels like it's artificial connection to me to some degree. It doesn't put myself into that organic environment to meet somebody, and also like the content of meeting somebody specifically for dating, it's kind of off-putting because you meet somebody you never seen them before, and then you're already in the contest do we date or not. It's all like, we just want to get to know each other better.
Yeah, but that's kind of the cool thing about Nomads is that we all know we have a limited amount of time. So time becomes of the essence. So if you really want to meet up with someone, let them know. The times that have worked out for me are people who have messaged me, said, hey, do you want to meet up in this public place? I'm passing through this day. And like we met pretty quickly and didn't really have a lot of that online chatting that you would have maybe when you're back home and you have months and months to build a relationship. That's not really the case when you're traveling. Sometimes you will meet someone and maybe the time is right to travel together. I was lucky to actually have a 1.5 year long relationship while I've been on the road, meeting a guy who was working in a place I was actually staying in a co-living place. And he decided, hey, you know what? I really like you. How do you feel about us traveling together? And I said, heck yeah, let's do it. We made plans and we actually just went off, and it was great in the sense that he was fully on board. And sometimes you can meet people who are fully on board, but it was not great in that it's not a regular relationship. You have to fast forward everything and basically start living together from a pretty early stage in your dating history, which puts a lot of pressure on a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's like, would you consider dating somebody locally? Or do you connect better with digital nomads?
I think it's easier if there is a language barrier to connect with digital nomads. However, I have dated locals as well. One of which actually became my 1.5 year boyfriend, who decided, hey, like let's do this. And we did have some cultural differences that we had to deal with, which is also a thing. All the other ones that I have dated locally have been shorter term, but at the same time, they've showed me places in their home city that I never would have found out as just a digital nomad, or hanging out at the digital nomad co-living spaces or the Salinas or whatever. So I'm really grateful for that too. What about you?
Absolutely. I think dating locals or like spending time on locals is a really great way to to get to know the place better. In my case, well, first thing first, I find it more difficult to connect to local, not necessarily from a language standpoint, but more from like a mindset standpoint, because everywhere I travel, I meet local that don't have a similar mindset to mine, which is, you have freedom to do whatever you want, you just have to take that. And then it seems like there is a necessity for me to have somebody that has a similar mindset to myself. And most places I go to, I mentioned as well in Canada, people tend to have, the locals tend to have a more negative approach towards life, in the sense that they don't have this like can-do attitude in general. So that's something very important for me, because you mentioned before that everybody around you is telling you negative stuff. It can be small and big, can be just like phrasing of sentences, but everything that influences me to some degree. And then I try to stay away from people who have this kind of mindset. I find it very easy to connect to digital nomads. It's just like most of the time we just click. And it just, we have a lot of things in common. We like to travel, we like to experience stuff, we like adventures, and that's super, super great. But again, it's kind of difficult to match if you're moving a lot during a space. So for me, it's one thing that worked really well is to kind of settle just for a couple of months into a location, kind of meet a bunch of people. And then when I start traveling again, it's easier for me to take that on board. And then when you have a pre-existing relationship with somebody, it's just like, hey, let's go to a trip to Bali or somewhere else in the world.
Absolutely. Have you found that, especially when you are living in a country where the economy isn't as strong and jobs don't pay as well, have you found that there is a relationship between the mindset and the limits, because someone you're dating doesn't make the same salary you do and maybe doesn't have access to a remote job like you do?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say that is necessarily like a general for the whole culture, because there are people and people, and they are different, especially now with access to internet. They have access to outside the world as well. Like, I feel that sometimes locals look at me and all other digital nomads as being fortunate and lucky, as opposed to somebody who has built this lifestyle for themselves. And that's pretty much off-putting, because it's a degree of envy, and I understand that absolutely. I think that if I was maybe 10 years ago and I was looking at somebody like myself, I'll probably have an envy sort of mindset as well, because like, oh, this person gets to do all those things, but they don't really see the work behind it. So
They don't see the work behind it. That's such a good point.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easier to envy somebody as opposed to realizing that most people actually have built themselves what they have, and they build themselves the persona they have.
100%. No, I have to agree with you. My ex that I dated for a year and a half, he was Mexican. His belief system was that, Mexican jobs don't allow us to be remote. They don't pay as well as your job, blah, blah, blah. And through that year and a half, I actually watched him work really hard, and now he's making the same amount as I am. He has clients from all over the world, and he's actually living a great life in France. He's also still a digital nomad. And that really was just a belief, a fixed mindset that I can't make the same amount of money. I can't travel and work remotely because X, Y, and Z. And it actually turned out there were lots of reasons he could. He just didn't see them yet.
Absolutely. And I think that this is kind of the power example. And I presume that in your case specifically, he saw you as like, oh, if Steph can do that, maybe I can do that too. So it's like encouraging for him as well to be able to change his mindset and expand his belief system.
Yeah, I hope so. I have to give him credit. He did all the work himself. Like, at the end of the day, we all have to do that work. We have to get to our low moments. We have to realize what our belief systems are in order to change them and save ourselves, like we were saying.
Absolutely. And I think that I'm trying to do the same thing to local culture, instead of kind of blaming people for the mindset they have. Just understand their backgrounds and the fact that they will be living in the same environment for generation to generation. It's not their only mindset. They pick up from their parents, and they pick up from their grandparents, and then they kind of live for that. And I understand it, because it's a good justification for the condition that they have without taking responsibility for it. It's like, it's somebody else's fault, not me. I'm doing the best I can, but the government, the country, whatever.
Well, and the interesting thing is that since we've broken up, we've maintained friends, and we talk about a lot of these things as well. And one of the things that he told me was he went home to visit Mexico last year, and I asked him, like, how does it feel to be around your old friends and family? And one of the things he had expressed to me, which I feel too, is that, well, I'm different now. I don't actually connect on the same way. And he essentially said, I realize the limitations that they're imposing on themselves, because they don't see beyond what's right in front of them. And that's something that I realize when I go home too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, traveling around the world definitely changes you tremendously. And then when you go back to the place you've been to, you realize, the first thing you realize is not how much the places have changed, but how much you have changed in contrast to the places.
Yeah, I feel like I've aged so much. I feel like an 80-year-old woman sometimes when I go home, just in terms of the fact that, yeah, like, I am tired and I have learned a lot. And I'm kind of realizing that the beliefs I had before, well, the world is a lot more complex than what I thought it used to be.
Absolutely. And that's something very interesting that you mentioned about the fact that you feel like you've been aged a lot. because I've been researching this theory of time dilation. And when you have a really, really interesting life, everything becomes, it feels like last week was 2 years ago because so many things have happened. And that's why I have an amazing life. And then we go back to the people that ended again to my childhood friends. I've seen that they kind of have a monotone life that just repeats itself over and over again. And they feel like, I felt like you left yesterday. It's like I feel like I left like 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's almost like time moves differently for us than it does for friends. I mean, I'm leaving in a month and I've been here for some time. I'm going back to Latin America this year to escape cold Canadian. I don't like fall, but winter also. And I realized that like I'm very aware of my leaving date, but everyone around me is kind of just like, oh, we have so much time to do all these things. And I know the week before I leave, everyone will be freaking out like, we didn't do as much as we said we would. We didn't have as much time as I thought. And yeah, that's kind of the interesting thing about becoming a nomad. You have fixed dates for where you have to leave a place, and that affects everything in your life.
Absolutely. And something else I want to ask you, since you mentioned the fact that you had a positive effect of the mindset of your ex, do you feel like you have some degree of influence, a positive influence over the people in your home country when you're visiting?
I mean, I can't speak for them, but I want to say yes. In the pandemic, my mom and stepdad in particular became very afraid in a way they weren't before. And all of a sudden, they were afraid to travel. And last year, I came home, I had a visit, I shared with them my plans, and right away, they kind of said, it's been a really long time since they've traveled, but I really want to do what you're doing. Can we meet in Greece this year? And I went, yep, sure, let's do it. And it has definitely opened my friends and family up more to the idea of going out and traveling and meeting up in places they hadn't really considered before. In terms of mindset, though, I mean, that's one small thing. I think maybe I did help take some of the fear out of travel for some of my family members who had that. But that's not really for everyone. And I would like to think that I do have a story that people are inspired by when I come home and I try to get myself back into my networking community and I meet people and it's a lot of new people and I'm telling them my story and they're kind of going, wow, I could actually do that too. And I do really like that. The fact that we have an alternative lifestyle can make an impression on others around you.
Absolutely. I think that it's not necessarily the story in itself, it's also the familiarity. It's like somebody I know does that. It's not like seeing somebody on the internet who does that, because it kind of feels disconnected. You feel like, oh, they have some asset, they have some knowledge, they have some backends that you don't know about. But when it's a friend doing that, it's like, oh, maybe that could work.
Yeah, and I think like just meeting people in general that are doing things that behind your cell phone look impossible, it really humanizes that person and it makes them look like they're not just lucky. They actually are here grinding it out like I am. They have bad days too. They also have to work hard and struggle sometimes.
Absolutely. I think it's very important part of the storytelling as well, because one of my hobbies is to make videos. And what interesting about videos, because I like to tell stories within those videos and share them with an audience. And one thing that's very important to me is to also share the doubts and the vulnerable moments, because I don't want to make it look like everything is just a win and everything works out, because that's going to disconnect the audience. It's like sort of like the comic book character Superman, who doesn't have any weakness and it's like everything works out, he can beat everybody up. So like there is nothing to, it's very difficult to tell a story. But when you showcase those vulnerable moments, like, oh, I can relate with that. You got to pick it out that way. This doesn't work out. He lost his job. So like, oh, I understand. I can relate with that. I think that those moments kind of connect people more when hearing a story. It's like, oh, it's not everything happy and jolly, rainbows and unicorns. It's like sometimes you have low moments and that's okay. You can just overcome them.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to connect with people who are doing things you want to. So if there is somebody that is traveling and working remotely, even if they're only doing it maybe 1 month a year and you're not yet, that person is valuable to talk to because they can give you a lot of information about what to expect. I mean, when I was not a nomad yet, and I'm looking on Instagram and I'm looking on Reddit and I'm seeing this highly filtered life that seems really appealing to me, I didn't know how hard it was going to be. And I have to say, for anyone who's listening, like, this life really is not all rainbows and sunshine. It can, and it's not always working from the beach. It can be really hard. And I mean, there are times where you can really struggle. I mean, there was a period last year where I went back into mental health counseling because I really needed it. And I had this perfect nomadic life. But the hard times are always going to be there. It's, you are the hero of your own story, and the person you're saving is yourself.
Absolutely. On the same note, I feel like it's better to suffering for something great as opposed to suffering for something average, because suffering it's due anyway. So they're very interesting. There are two types of mistakes. There are mistakes of ambitions and mistake of flaws. So you don't want to be the person who's sitting on the couch doing nothing and then end up, suffering the consequences of that, because the consequences are coming anyway. You're better off to suffer for a great story as opposed to suffering for an average story.
Yeah, and trying. There's probably going to be times where you're going after something and you get stalled, whether it be a global pandemic or a sickness or whatever reason. There's always things that can slow you down. It's okay to be stuck as well, as long as you are still trying, or at least staying present and aware of where you are in your journey, because you're not in the final destination yet. You're just in a place.
Absolutely. And to tie to a point you mentioned earlier, I think that's network is pretty important as well. You see how people have done the things you want to do, and also how people who support you and then they're positive towards you. And something very interesting I've been thinking lately, how to realize if you have good friends or not, is that when you do something positive, they want to do that as well. And that's the quality of positive people. And when you do something positive, the negative one, they're going to try to stop you, is like draw it back, because you put them in contrast. I can give you two examples. When I started my Nomad journey, I made a video and I posted it online. I shared it to my family as well, and my sister saw it as well, and she decided to move from Chicago to Miami for the winter just because she saw my video. I was like, that's interesting. Instead of being bitter and resentful, you can try to do the same thing. And another example is that when I decided to quit drinking about a year and a half ago, a few of my friends, they're kind of like very pushy around it to try to stop me. It's like, hey, you think you're better than us, just have a drink, whatever. And I was like, I don't want to have people around when I do something positive, they're gonna pull me back.
Yeah, that it is really hard. There are definitely people who want to see the best for you. And I've also, interestingly, come up against that same pressure when was trying not to drink. It was people who either didn't accept me because I didn't want to drink anymore and were trying to actually break me and encourage me to drink, which is kind of a horrible thing. If someone tells you they have a goal and you try to work against that, yeah, that's not a friend. Or you have those people who are like, good for you, that's great. Or you have the people who don't drink and are like, I don't know, I had an experience where I was in Turkey and I was trying not to drink, and I found that there was no in between. There were either people who really wanted to go hard and party, and they were the ones trying to encourage me to, fall off the wagon, drink, party with them, stay out all night. And then there was like a group of very conservative Muslims who didn't drink at all, and it was part of their religion. And I just didn't feel like I fit into either group. So I was in a place of being very lonely, and it was not helpful. I didn't have anyone to be accountable with me and reach that goal of not drinking. And yeah, I went back to it. So yeah, that's really a good way to see who really actually has your back.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I noticed since I started drinking is that my close friends that I still have now, they also limited or reduced their drinking, and also they don't drink around me.
So you had that positive effect on people.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting that the best way to teach people something is through the power of example, as opposed to just lecturing them about why I should do one thing or the other.
Show, don't tell. I love it.
Something else, since you mentioned loneliness, well, I want to go to this topic as well. Being a digital nomad seems to be a very social lifestyle, but sometimes you get really lonely because it might be a difficult time to start building a community or like engaging a community right away after you move to a new location. How do you cope with that part, and what kind of action do you take to engage very easily into a new community?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And there's so many layers to it. I mean, I think for me, the most important thing is to become aware of what situations make you feel lonely. I gave an example of Turkey where I really found it hard to find a sober crowd. I think it comes down to knowing what situations make you feel lonely, which situations actually make it feel good to be lonely. So I was talking about before when we were recording, I was talking about my ideal home being in the woods and just kind of being like out alone. I see myself so alone in that situation because there is nothing that I feel more at peace at than when I am in the woods alone. And there are some situations where I feel not lonely, and there are situations where I feel incredibly lonely. And that actually, at this stage in my journey, has helped dictate and guide where I stay. So I do now look for places that have access to nature. So even if I feel lonely, I have healing and I have peace and I can go to those places. I also now look for places that do have a digital nomad community just because I find, like we were saying earlier, those are the people that I can find that are most like-minded to me. They want to go on trips on their weekend. They're usually working during the day like I am. They want to hang out at night. They know the struggle of what it's like to work abroad and to have to move when your visa's up. So I look for those places. I do research on Reddit. I use Facebook. I use a number of tools like Nomadlist to find digital nomad hubs. That helps a lot. I also know that I feel sad and lonely in cities. So when I know that I'm going to be living in a more urban setting, I actually never live alone. So I either look for a roommate, which you can find pretty easily on Facebook or Kijiji or different sites like that. Or if I can't find one, I look for co-living spaces. If you do a Google search of a place you're thinking about, if you see co-living spaces, that's usually an indicator that there are nomads there. And then or sometimes I will look for rooms in a house, which are usually a listing on Airbnb, and I'll read the comments to kind of get an idea who've lived there. Sometimes I found great apartments and been able to make deals for month-to-month rentals that way, and I've had a great group of roommates that I really got along with and had a great time. And then I would say my final strategy is if I can't find any of those, I actually, for the first time last year, did a Workaway with a family where I was working on their kind of like organic farm. I was living in a cottage, so I had privacy, but they were also always around. They had animals, which I love, and they had children, which I also love. So for me, that really squashed the loneliness. I wasn't necessarily with nomads, but my time with that family was amazing.
Just wanting to clarify, can you please define what's a Workaway?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just assumed everyone knows. So a Workaway is essentially a trade for work that you do. So typically it's volunteer. It's usually not really paid. And it's technically, I guess you could say, illegal. Like if you're going to immigration and you're crossing into, say, Spain, you can't get there and say purpose of visit, oh, I'm here to work, because it's actually not allowed. You are still technically a tourist. And it's when you go and work, and in lieu of being paid money, you're given kind of board and sometimes food. Some jobs do also pay you, and I've actually found a client through a Workaway that I did, where some of the marketing and work I did for them extended it over into my actual freelance business.
So how do you find those kind of opportunities?
Yeah. So there is a site called Workaway. It's a membership site that you pay for, but I've actually never paid for it. I use different Facebook groups that have Workaways. You can post a picture of yourself, kind of make a posting about like what you're looking for, what your skills are, where you want to travel. People will usually comment on them. There's always people looking for help. And then it's up to you kind of to vet that person, make sure that it's going to be a safe environment, that if you're working online, you're going to have internet and still be able to get your work done. But that would typically be how you'd find them.
Absolutely. So it's more like through community as opposed to having a direct way to apply for them.
Exactly. It's more like community. And just to kind of give you a bird's eye view of what my process looked like. I was in Europe. I was in Turkey. I knew I wanted to be in Europe for the summer. So what I looked for was a Facebook group that specifically was Workaways in Europe. And I found one called Workaway Europe. I posted a picture of myself, kind of what I was looking for, some details on me, and a bunch of people responded with their opportunity. And I kind of just contacted the people who I was most interested in. We did video calls to kind of get a feeling of each other and what the work I'd be doing with. And the rest is history. You buy a ticket, you go, and you hope for the best.
Sounds really good. And one thing I want to highlight regarding what you mentioned earlier, the fact that lonely and alone, most of the time, they're not the same thing. And the fact that, sometimes you're in the big city can be lonely. Sometimes, as mentioned, it can be in a cabin in the woods and feel very fulfilled. It can feel like you're not lonely at all. That's very interesting. I mentioned that it might be a bit more difficult in big cities to make friends and to connect with people as opposed to in small cities where you have a more connected community.
I 100% agree. It's interesting how that is. Sometimes there is a disproportionate amount of people to the amount of loneliness you feel. So
absolutely. And that's something very interesting I've been thinking about because I've been living in London for a long time and I don't have as many friends as I have here now in Portugal, where each city has maybe 10,000 people in total. And my theory is that because people are overwhelmed by so many people in general, they kind of become desensitized to an interaction, human interaction. And that doesn't mean as much as it would mean into like a small community because you don't have that on a regular basis. You don't get overwhelmed by millions of people every day. So if you take the tube in London, every day you're going to be overwhelmed by millions of people for sure. So people are kind of get desensitized to that, and that's my suspicion. And also it's an overwhelming report of at least shallow to some degree, but it's still better than nothing social interaction that comes with people. And then when you have a million social interaction with people, you kind of get desensitized to the quality of them, which is like, oh, it's just another guy or another person that I met. It's not that interesting anymore. It's similar to having a company and having like many people apply for a job as opposed to just having 2 or 3. You're going to look more carefully through the resumes that you receive as opposed to just takes 5 seconds and you have to skim through all of them because you don't have time to kind of. That's my theory overall for why people are more lonely in bigger cities as opposed to small ones.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And do you have plans to live in any big cities going forward? Because I'm curious about what are your strategies if you do plan on living in big cities to kind of meet your people? Because I agree, I find it's harder when there's more people.
One of the things that works really well when I was in London, and that's something that can work for really, really big city, is to engage in activities. And as opposed to going to social events, I prefer to go in activities that are social. Because when you go to a social event, kind of the main purpose is to talk to people, and that kind of becomes a bit of pressure. And then when you go to like any social activities, like maybe the board game group or like a volleyball group or anything that it requires a few more people to play, to engage in that game, I think it's a lot easier to engage in conversation for once because you're going to have the social activity that you're engaging in itself as a topic for the conversation. So you could just start from that. And also like board games, they might seem boring to some people, but they're really great for the connected people because, especially the teamwork one, because you kind of like work together with people to build something, which is truly a great way to connect with people and create deeper relationships.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Finding activities is a way that I've kind of met people. So for instance, I was in Hania, Crete last year. There's a really big Nomad community there. So much so that some of the Nomad meetups are overwhelming with people. But what they did was they had us playing spike ball on the beach, and you can only play with 4, maybe 6. I don't really know the rules, but we would only play with 4 people at once, and we would be switching. And I found that kind of almost speed dating way of getting people to meet each other was way more effective than us just meeting on the beach and hanging out and feeling kind of weird social pressure of like where you sit and kind of like, is it rude to get up and move to another group? That kind of setup does it for you. So you're right. Yeah. Looking for kind of the activity groups is really the way to meet people. And you kind of got to break that big crowd up and talk to different people one-on-one or team build together, like you were saying.
Absolutely. And like give a really great example is that I was in Aarhus, Denmark, a couple of months back, and I couldn't find a community there. So I said, wait, my own. So I met friends there, and just like randomly walked into, I'm not going to go into details, but I randomly walked into a board game store, and then I made friends with the cashier, and then we kind of talked to each other for a bit, and then decided to organize a social event. And when I talked to the venues, one of the things that was very important for me to have tables but no chairs. And that was like, I specifically requested, so we went there half an hour before and then removed all the chairs because I want people to stand up to kind of have more dynamic environment, because if you sit down, you're kind of locked into a place. So that's going to become your seat. You kind of stay there, one people and the other. But when you kind of have a sitting back dynamic, it's easier to move around and to talk to other people. And then we organized a few games because we felt like it's going to be more engaging. So I could utilize all my knowledge that I accumulated over the years. And we organized a few playful games, like we split people in groups of 4, 3 or 4. And then we asked them to share like fun facts about each other. And then we had a bunch of open-ended questions on the table, and each one would have to tell a story about them. It was really, really engaging. It was very, very easily for people to start conversation as opposed to just just putting people together and saying like, hey, socialize.
100%. Yeah, you're 100% right. That's a great idea to take out the chairs. I love it.
Yeah. So,
oh yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that works really well for me is I love hiking, and I've noticed that it's a really good way to meet people because you never go hike alone. So there's always in any environment I've been to that allows hiking. In London, it doesn't work that well, but in general, if you have an environment that has some trails around, it's a really good and social environment because you just have to walk for a couple of hours and you have a bunch of people around you. So the main activity is walking and enjoying it, but you're also going to talk to people, and it's really, really engaging.
No, you're right. That's exactly what I look for too, is I do my research before I move to a place, and I look for either a hiking group or a trail running group, because I find that that's a great way to meet the like-minded people. But also when you're trail running, I'm going to more so be talking to the people who are running at my speed. And that's not going to be everybody. So that kind of is a nice way for me to filter people and get conversation time with people. And then within the hiking groups, there are times where you kind of spread out a little bit. There are times where you all sit and rest. And for whatever reason, you never really end up with that same person the whole time. Even when my ex and I used to go join hiking groups, we'd often end up talking to other people and making separate friends. And that was great.
Yeah, absolutely. A really good trick when you go hiking is to get a bunch of snacks that can be shared across the group.
Yes, I so agree.
It's a really good way. Just around like, hey, do you want some peanuts? And it's really good and engaging way to start talking to people.
Oh no, sorry, I'm allergic. Oh, you're allergic? All right. I love that.
It's a really good way. Another thing that I want to talk to you, since you mentioned that you're into hiking, it's also the fitness side of traveling, because in order to be able to stay fit and in order to be able to have a healthy life, you have to have a recurrent fitness program. And if you're traveling a lot, that kind of get disturbed because it's pretty difficult to establish a routine. How do you approach the fitness part of your life, and how do you manage to keep exercising while you're traveling?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. It is hard, isn't it, to keep routine?
It's absolutely difficult because everything is changing all the time. You have new places around and then new people. So it's like you have to kind of establish yourself there. And then, yeah, sometimes you have work difference between your time zone and that zone. So you kind of have to adjust to that as well. If you're a morning person, you have to move to the afternoon based on the time zone. So
yeah, this is the bane of my existence. So yeah, I have to agree. Like for me, it really is about routine, but how I organize my routine is really weighted around the things I value in my life. And in my top 4, definitely health and fitness is up there. So, I mean, I've always been able to schedule it in my day because I know that's what makes me feel good. But I like to do it in the morning, and that can be really hard where I'm starting work in a time zone and it's 5 or 6 a.m. I mean, then I got to move it to the end of the day. But yeah, for me, it is all schedule. I mostly do try to be in places where I can get up early and do a workout. There are a lot of things that can take more time than others. So for me, it's really about when I'm on the road, getting my workout done in a time block. And I hate time blocking, but you kind of have to do it because you have to get on calls by a certain time in the day. So knowing the night before what my schedule and my workout is going to be, I, over the years, have condensed my workout schedule from being this big gym trip to being very home based. And I think I have to thank the pandemic a little bit for that. It really turned me on to YouTube video workouts, which I use until this day. They already tell you the timestamp. You know how long that workout is going to take. I carry a little bit of equipment with me, but really just resistant bands. Calisthenics is really popular all over the world, and that's a hard workout. So you're not going to be doing that for as long as you would be going to the gym and maybe socializing, taking some time on the treadmill. So for me, it's been about making a hard workout in a small amount of time, and I always schedule that almost always in the morning. If I'm in a time zone where I'm working later in the evening, which sucks for me, I mean, then I allow myself to have more of a gym schedule, or I'll go to the bouldering gym, or I'll join those trail running groups that meet in the day. If it is that I'm working early in the morning, my afternoons are my afternoons. So that's usually where I'm running or biking. So.
Absolutely. That's something you mentioned super great, is that you are focusing on training sessions which are very much environment independent. So you can go biking and running and just do some home workouts almost everywhere in the world.
Almost everywhere in the world. Yeah. And you don't have to be carrying around weight. I mean, I feel bad for the people who love to go to the gym, because for me, that always takes a little bit more time. But if you are a gym buff, you love to lift, look into calisthenics training. You're getting a good workout. A lot of those people are strong, and all you need for running is running shoes. You can do it.
Absolutely. One of the things that I really like to do is I like to train in fighting as well. And that's really useful because you can combine the conversation we had before about social life and also about the training. And I go here in Portugal to fighting gym, and that's another way to meet really cool people. And that's something it's a contrasting experience for everybody who's new to this environment, is that you think that if you go to fight gym, everybody is going to be mean and angry and ready to go. People there are super nice. Like it's impressively nice. Like, we practice sparring, and then someone just put a bit of power in the hit, like, how many, you're okay, everything's good, it's like you're doing fine. And that's really amazing. And then it's also great to connect with locals as opposed to nomads. And also if you want to learn some language, the local language, it's a great way to fight the gym, because it's kind of force you at some point to be able to interact with people. It's not a solo sport. So you have to have a sparring partner. Sometimes you change your sparring partner, which is really a great way to connect with people.
Absolutely. And actually, some of the best communities I have met, local communities specifically, have been through some of these groups, to the point where, in one of my hiking groups, we would hang out all day and we would all have a picnic later. Or some of the people from some of my running groups wanted to throw me a going away party before I left. Or when I was in Argentina, my trail running group there wanted to take me out for boliche all night. And I have to agree, it's such a good way to meet people. And if you value that social interaction, and you value you value health and fitness, like, you can put those two values together and knock them out. You feel really good by the end of the day.
Absolutely. And you can look around the environment you are. For example, as mentioned, in your environment, you like to run a lot. In where I live now, there's a lot of people playing volleyball on the beach. And I was surprised to see how welcoming they are. I just see a group playing, and I kind of approach, they're a bit timid. And it's like, hey man, how's it going? It's gonna join. Like, okay.
Nice.
And that's a really cool way to exercise, also get some sun in and also meet people. So you can mix those elements together. Cool. So we had a really interesting conversation. I have two questions for you that I want to close with.
Sure.
And the first question is, what advice would you give to your former self before starting your nomad journey?
Yeah, okay, that's such a great question. Okay. I think if I'm going back in time and talking to my old self who was really fighting for this nomad journey and wanting it to come to fruition, and anyone who's listening now who resonates with that, I think believe in yourself. You're going to do what you said you're going to do. It may not be easy. The likelihood of challenge is great, but just keep going. You'll get there, and you can do anything you want.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And one thing that's I've been thinking about is because many people say like, hey, you need to prepare yourself too much and you have to have everything sorted out. Sometimes you just need to jump and then figure out on the way.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't mean you're going to land in the water. You might land on the rocks and have to kind of roll over and fall into that water after. It might be really hard waves when you hit the water. You'll find out, but you gotta make that jump first, or you're never going to know.
Absolutely. And you're always going to make a bunch of stupid mistakes. It's inevitable. All of us have done it. It's okay. you got to
Okay. You're going to be fine.
you got to correct yourself, and then you can learn to become a wiser version of yourself, which is great.
Absolutely. Great.
So that was leading to my last question, which is very similar to this one, to kind of tap into it as well. It's like, what would advise the person who's just thinking about starting now? They haven't lived their home country ever, and they just want to start a nomadic journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've just started learning about it, for me, and maybe you can agree with this, Octavian, the best way to learn is through experience. So I really think that you don't have to go all in. Just because you want to be a digital nomad doesn't mean you have to be. I have met people who are way smarter than me on this same journey who, instead of jumping all in, they took a month vacation to a place that they could live how they see their digital nomad lifestyle, and they test it out. I think that's a really great way that if you already have a remote job, you can go try it. Go experience it. So, I mean, I'll just give an example. When I first went to Mexico, I moved into a co-living space, which is digital nomads. And there was a girl who came, she booked for a month. She said, hey, I just got my first remote job. I want to see if I actually like this whole remote and living in another country thing. I know I'm going home by this day. I think that's a really great way to experience and experiment and see if you can actually make it a lifestyle. So that's the advice I would give to people who are thinking about it. If you don't want to jump right now, stick your toe in the water.
That's a really great idea, because being a nomad is always reversible. And you might end up finding out that this lifestyle is not for you. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. You're not going to live the rest of your life with regret, thinking, oh, I didn't jump, I didn't try it. And you'll be happy. It's like, I tried it, it's not for me. I will move to the next thing and then kind of live and try something else. But that idea, if you don't go in and try it, at least for sample it, for, as mentioned as well, a month, just try it out and see how it works well for you. And I think that's a really great advice to people who are looking to start.
Yeah, and even if you are a person who wants to work online and you haven't done that yet, take the skills you have and see if you can work with one freelance client as a freelancer while you're working your on-site job or what have you, to see if freelancing is a thing for you. It took me 1 full year of working my full-time job and freelancing to decide how I envisioned what my freelance digital nomad job would look like. And I still work like that today. So I think like the moral of the story for the people thinking about it, just try something.
Absolutely. You can always come back. You don't like it.
Come back. Yeah. Even us, like we can give up this nomad life and go back, and that's okay. Like life is what you make it.
Absolutely. That's a really great closing line. So thank you, Steph, for your time. We had a really great conversation, and it was truly amazing. I'm happy for the things that I managed to learn, and I hope we had a great time as well.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch the rest of your episodes.
Thank you. Bye.